Hey, in this video, we're going to look at the last very important component for the normal distribution. So that is, given the probability, can we go opposite direction to figure out what's the value for x? And so to help you understand how to do this calculation, we look at question number 5. So the average return for large cap domestic stock fund over a 3-year was 10%. Assume the 3-year return was normally distributed across fund with a standard deviation of 2%. How big does the return have to be to put a domestic stock fund in the top 5% for the 3-year period and keep the 2 decimal places? And second part of this question is how big does the return have to be to put a domestic stock fund in the bottom 5% for the 3-year period? So before we look at Excel, and we have to do a little bit of analysis. And although this is a financial problem, the question of the financial market, it actually can be simplified to mathematical models. So that is our normal distribution. And so first of all, we have to identify what is random variable we're looking for. So the random variable actually is the return of the stock, And we know the return of the stock is follow normal distribution. As I mentioned many times, if we know the random variable follow normal distribution, we have to find two key informations. So first is the mean, second is the deviation. Without those two information, we won't be able to do any further calculation. So therefore, what is the mean? So the average return. So the average also, I mentioned in the class, is also means the mean. So the average return is the mean of the return is equal to 10%. So the value of the mu or the mean is 10%. And also we know the standard deviation is 2%. So we know the mean and the standard deviation. So now look at what we try to calculate. How big does the return have to be? Put a domestic stock fund in the top 5%. So it's very different from what we calculated before, because instead of calculating the probability, so the probability we're already given, so that's 5%. So we know the probability 5%, but we try to calculate the range of the return. So how big does return have to be to put a domestic stock fund in the top 5%? So therefore, we are trying to find the value of the return, so the value of x. So what's the minimum value of x in order to put the stock in the top 5%? So we understand we are trying to calculating, and we are actually trying to connect with our normal distribution curve, because that's the best way to help us to understand what we are really trying to calculate. So basically, the top 5%, this information what we are given is this shaded area. So the size of this area is 5%. But now what we try to calculating is the value on this x-axis. So this black dot, so the value of this black dot is the one we try to calculate. If you think about the previous video we look at, is really different, because we are actually given the value of this black dot, and we are trying to figure out this red area. So it's go backward. So therefore we're going to use different formula, a little bit different, because you have to understand that we are still dealing with normal distribution, but we are doing a inverse operation, right? Inverse, because we know the size of the area, but we actually try to calculate this black dot. It's inverse. So let's put our key information on Excel first. So open the blank Excel. First, we know mu. First of all, don't type 10%. So we are convert any percentage to the value with the decimal places. So that will be 0.1, right? So that is a return, 10%. And then the standard deviation, which is our sigma, is equal to 0.02. So remember, 2%. So you need to move the decimal place to the left twice. So that would be 0.02, not 0.2. So the return is 0.1. The standard deviation is 0.02. So now, what would be the formula we're using? So first of all, we are calculating the stock in the top 5%. As you can see here is the upper corner. As I mentioned many times, when we look at the regular calculation, the Excel won't be able to calculate the value on the right hand, the top tail of the normal distribution. So if you know the value of the black dots, you only can calculate the lower area. In order to get the upper area, you have to use 1 minus. We are using the same idea to do this inverse calculation. So although the question is asked for top 5%, we understand the Excel actually won't be able to directly calculate the top 5%. They only can calculate lower 5%. So which means the top 5% has to convert it to lower the value, the complementary of 5%. So that will be 95%. So that's something we have to keep in mind. We're never able to calculate x larger than the value. We only can calculate lower than a value. So therefore, the percentage 5% has to convert to lower 95, a lower value. So 1 minus 5%, you should get 0.95. So this is the probability we were using to help us to figure out this black dot. So this black dot. So now the formula we are using is called NORM. Like I said, it's inverse. Instead of DIST, we call the INV. So normal distribution, but it is inverse. So now let's put together NORM dot INV. So parenthesis normal dot INV. So the probability we just use 0.95. Like I said, it has to be the lower area. You cannot use the upper area. So now the second entry will be the mean 0.1. And the last entry is the standard deviation. So here you don't need to tell the computer true or false because, as I said, normal will only use true. So when you calculate, do the inverse operation, they won't ask you true or false. And then close the parenthesis. So then, how many decimal? So 2 decimal places. So we can do, so that will be 13.29%. So basically, in order to be a top 5% of the stock, you have to be the return at least 13.29%, at least 13.29% in order to belong to the top 5%. Okay, so now we look at the second part of the question. So how big does the return have to be to put a domestic stock fund in the bottom 5%? So basically, here is my bottom 5%. So then what we try to calculate will be this area. Oh, sorry. Will be this area, okay? So we are calculating this area. So now for this question, we understand that this 5% area is on the lower tail of the normal distribution. So then we know this 5% will not need to be converted to 1 minus 5% because the 5% here is already talking about the lower area. So we don't need to convert it. So what we're gonna do, we can just directly use the 5% and we're using the same formula. So equal to NORM dot INV parenthesis 0.05. Remember 5% is 0.05, not 0.5. I know I saw so many students make mistake before. So keep in mind 5% is 0.05. And then standard deviation of the mean 0.1 and the standard deviation 0.02, close the parenthesis. So the return will be 6. If we keep 2 decimal places, it will be 6.71%. So that makes sense, right? So if your return is lower, so you should be on the bottom tier, right? So if your return is higher, so it will belong to the top tier. So therefore, in order to be in the top 5%, you have to have return at least 13.29%. If you want to be the bottom 5%, so your return has to be less than 6.71%. So that is how we use the inverse operation to figure out the value of x given the value of the probability if the random variable is follow normal distribution. So you will have a lot of questions in this week assignment. So you can use this method to help you to figure out the probability. So the key here is, I think the most difficult part for this kind of question is to identify. So the probability given to you is belong to the upper area or lower area. So the probability given you is belong to upper area, so make sure you're going to use 1 minus probability. If the probability given you is belong to the lower area, like smaller and equal to, and so then that will be, you don't need to use 1 minus. So that is the end of this video. So I hope you are enjoying the powerful normal probability.